Hello. You know, a lot of times when I make videos, I do something more scripted, and I know I've been kind of leaning in persona content for a little bit during this, but I can't say I'm a channel who's afraid of trying new things. And one thing that I've always been very interested in giving a shot is a actual Nuzlocke, because I really am not good at Nuzlocks, let me tell you that. So, me and one of my friends gave it a shot, like genuine Nuzlocking, like planning ahead and trying to just not YOLO it. And, I had such a fun time doing it, and I was recording the footage because I wanted to get my own footage for Fire Red anyways, that I decided, you know what, why not? Let's make a video on my first Nuzlocke. So, let's get started. I'll start with stating the rules. Me and my friend were playing by what I believe are hardcore Nuzlocke rules. You must catch the first Pokemon that you encounter in any route. If that encounter dies, or you fail to catch it, then you don't get another one. However, we also are using something known as Dupe's Clause, which is a rule that says that if we already have a Pokemon from that line, we can run from that battle and encounter a new encounter that we don't have. This allows us to have a little bit more control over what Pokemon we use later on, and also it can make the planning ahead be a little bit more fun. No items may be used in battle. The mode must be set to set, which means that you can't switch out for free every single time that your opponent's about to send in a Pokemon. On top of that, we must not go past the highest level of the next gym leader's highest Pokemon. If we manage to do that, or by accident or on purpose, the Pokemon that has been overleveled past them may not be used in the next battle. But overleveling in a gym leader or a boss fight is completely fair and allowed. These are kind of the basic rules for our run, and that's kind of what we're going with. So, without further ado, let's get right into the game. So, we start off the run by choosing our gender and naming ourselves. I went with this. Everybody who knows anything about me can guess where this is going. But anyways, so we start off and do the usual things that you do in Fire Red. Leave your room, go and get scolded by Professor Oak, and then get brought to a lab where you get to choose from 3 different Pokemon. I chose Squirtle because Squirtle's an incredibly good defensive Pokemon, and it has the type advantage against the first gym leader. Now, I could have gone Bulbasaur, but the extra special defense provided by Blastoise is going to be an invaluable asset by the late game. So, that's what we're doing. I'm not following a particular naming trend, if you guys are wondering. So, after that, we go to get Oak's parcel and come back. Me and my friend agree to not count the encounters that we get on the way to it, because we don't have the means to catch Pokeballs yet. But for my Route 1 encounter, I caught a Rattata. Moving on to Route 2, we catch a Caterpie, and my Viridian Forest encounter was a Weedle. Leading up to the first badge, there wasn't really any big problems fighting Brock. Squirtle was an invaluable asset, as usual, tearing through Brock with its strong special attack, water-type moves, and even if I didn't use that, I still had a Butterfree that had Confusion, so we were sitting pretty going on to Route 3. After getting the running shoes and proceeding on to Mount Moon, on Route 3 I caught a Pidgey, and I decided not to do anything for my Route 4 encounter. Instead, I decided to buy a Magikarp, which I planned on being part of my late game team. I went on to Mount Moon, where I picked up some valuable items, as well as failed to catch my Paras encounter, which losing Paras wasn't that big of a deal. Honestly, it probably wasn't, but for me, I probably really could have used that to catch some other encounters easier, and Spore would have been very nice. Moving on to Misty, we have a little bit of a tough time beating her, and so I decided to just leave Rattata in, and Kin was brutally murdered. I did that, and the rival fight got a little bit close when Makoto almost got killed, which would have been really, really bad for me personally. But yeah, we proceeded through the rest of Nugget Bridge in that route, and we didn't really have any real trouble going through there, just because it wasn't really that hard, especially when you're doing a level cap and using rare candies. And before anybody scolds me for using rare candies, not everybody has 1,000 hours to pour into Nuzlocke. Moving past Nugget Bridge, we got an Oddish on Route 24 nicknamed Rio, and on Route 25 we caught an Abra and nicknamed it Fuka. I do plan on using this Abra later on as a part of the final Elite Four team, so we'll see how well that pans out when we get there. But another thing that I should have noted at the beginning is that we used the Universal Pokemon Randomizer to enable impossible evolution, so we had a wider use for Pokemon like Graveler and Alakazam, since those are both good Pokemon that we wouldn't have access to either otherwise. Plus, we were just doing this for fun. But due to how I went about Route 5, due to how I went about the previous routes, Route 5 didn't really have anything that I really wanted, but if I need something later on, we can always come back. Before we went forward with the SSN and Lieutenant Surge, though, I went to Route 11 and I caught a Drowsy, and I caught a Diglett. I'm glad to actually get Diglett here, because if we got Dugtrio, we wouldn't be able to use it for Lieutenant Surge, which is what I was primarily catching it for. That and Diglett is just a very good Pokemon. It's very fast. Both Beedrill and Butterfree have actually been carrying us pretty hard and are surprisingly still useful. But we actually lost Kenji because I sent it to its death against an Onix and Rock Tunnel, but you know what? That's what he gets for not letting me start a social link with Junpei. He's the reason why we had to wait till Portable to get one, and why we're not getting a social link with him in Reload, so he deserves this. However, after that little slip up at the beginning of the route, we caught our Route 10 encounter and our Route 11 encounter was not really used. I'll come back here later if I need it. But in Rock Tunnel, we actually got a Geodude. I'm actually happy to get Geodude, because getting Onix would have really sucked, because even with impossible evolutions turned on, there's still no way in hell we would ever actually get Onix, because the way Fire Red and Leaf Green works, you can't actually get Pokemon from other generations before a certain point, which really sucks, especially since that neuters the use of something like Crobat into Golbat. That's just what I felt anyways. Moving past Lavender Town, because we'll come back later, I skipped Route 8 for now, and got Growlithe on Route 7. And Beedrill really was useful in Erica's battle, but I'm starting to think that Beedrill might be falling off a little bit, which I'm kinda sad about, but it's good that it's lived up its usefulness for now. After finishing Erica's gym, we immediately run over to go and do the Rocket Game Corner thing so we can go and do Pokemon Tower. And whoa, was I kinda foolish. I immediately did the Game Corner, and I lost Beedrill to the Rocket Grunt that had a Coughing with Explosion that I completely forgot about. And you know what? That was on me, but Beedrill would have not been very useful moving forward. So if I had to lose any Pokemon to a mistake like this, I guess I'm kind of happy that it was Beedrill. But after that, I went to Pokemon Tower to get the Flute to catch Snorlax. I also caught a Haunter here, and I had a little bit of an issue doing it, but it wasn't really that big of a deal. Although I really hoped I had gotten Cubone, but that's besides the point. The rival here wasn't really that big of a problem. We have a pretty solid type core for our team, so we could pretty much work around a lot of the stuff that was thrown at us. But we used the Pokemon Flute on the Snorlax, and we nicknamed it Shinjiro, mainly because, you know, tanky status and stuff like that. I go to Saffron, and I receive the Hitmonchan, and I name it Akihiko because, come on, look at it, how could I not? But I did manage to lose Drowsy, which really sucked because it had become a Hypno by now, and that made me kind of upset. And I also lost Pidgeotto to the same trainer in one series of fights. I managed to lose a good Pokemon, but it's fine since I can fill the niche left behind by using the Spearow, even though Pidgeotto would have probably been better. I skipped the encounter on Cycling Road, especially since I can't catch anything aside from a Doduo due to Species Clause, and I don't really need a flying type, so I move on. I go through the Safari Zone to get Surf and Strength, but I use Repels while I traverse, as I am trying to encounter route to get a specific Pokemon from later on here. If you're wondering what encounter routing is, it's basically like, for people playing with Species Clause like I am, you can guarantee a certain Pokemon in a later route by catching pretty much every other Pokemon that can appear there. So, for example, if I caught a Rattata and an Ekans, then in a route where both of those appeared, I could guarantee the other Pokemon that you would have encountered if you didn't have if you had Species Clause on. So that would mean that in any future route, if I ran into a Rattata or an Ekans, that would mean I would get the run from that fight and try another encounter, which would basically give me a little bit more choice and influence in my team for the later parts of the game. I do this because there's a specific Pokemon I really want in the Safari Zone, and of course, not having a Repel on would pretty much make it impossible to go through here without actually getting in an encounter. But after I find the Gold Teeth and Surf, I go to beat Koga before I retrieve Strength. I go back to Viridian City to get my fishing encounter, which ended up being a Poliwag. This isn't really something I wanted because I was hoping to get a Goldeen, because I wanted to eliminate Goldeen and some other Pokemon from the fishing encounter in the Safari Zone, but I wanted to basically guarantee something in the Safari Zone by eliminating Goldeen and Psyduck from the encounter table for the Super Rod. So I go to Route 22 to catch a surfing Psyduck, and then I return to Fuchsia City where I fish in the Fishing Enthusiast Pond to catch a Goldeen. And with that, I am now prepared to go to the Safari Zone and collect the Pokemon I wanted, a Dratini. Even though I encounter routed, I literally tried this for like 45 minutes, so I kind of just gave up and left because I got sick of it, because come on, it's boring. So, after I go and get the item finder from one of Oak's aides, I then go to retrieve both of the leftovers that you need the item finder to retrieve on both tiles where the Snorlax was sleeping. If you didn't know, you can actually do this on a fair amount of different tiles in Fire Red and Leaf Green if you use the item finder in specific places. You can actually use it, I'm pretty sure, underneath every single static encounter where they were to get a good held item. So just a tip if you ever want to. But with that, I went to go and do Silph Co. Now, I didn't really have much issue here because I have a pretty strong team, and combined with the ability to return to the Poké Center and heal after battle, it wasn't really that big of a deal. I just had to be very careful, which kind of translates to being a little bit boring, but at the same time, I am doing my first Nuzlocke. I do want to actually make it to the end. But I did grab the Lapras from here, and I nicked, if you're wondering. Again, the Rivals team wasn't that big of an issue since I had a particularly strong type coverage for his team already, along with enough tanky Pokemon to tank hits that I was uncomfortable with hitting, and so that wasn't really that difficult. But I did actually almost have issues with Giovanni, since I actually forgot to refill the PP for Surf, so I couldn't actually sweep his team. That could have been bad. All I had to do was go back to the Poké Center and heal, but no. Yeah, so that was a little brief moment of panicking. But I went to fight Sabrina, and after struggling through remembering how to go about her gym and being too stubborn to look up the way you're supposed to walk to get through her gym, I eventually got to Sabrina, and the act of getting to her was a lot harder than actually beating her, because outside of the Psy Waves that, for some ungodly reason, always confused my Pokemon and just drew the fight out for a bit, I didn't have too much issues. And I know I'm saying that about every major fight. I'm not a good writer when it comes to these scripts, especially since I underestimated the amount of note-taking I should probably take for this, if I'm being honest. But with that, we are very nearly at the end of this. I went through the Pokemon Mansion, and I didn't really catch anything because I used Repels, because at this point I kind of already had my team, and I was more rushing for the end of the game than actually trying to do something else. But I went through the Pokemon Mansion, and I beat up Blaine. I didn't have a problem getting there, and honestly, for one of the last gym leaders in the game, Blaine was not hard at all. Like, he wasn't hard at all, especially if you have a water type that's decently bulky, like I do. You can just sweep through all of his Pokemon with Surf. And not only that, all the questions made it incredibly easy to avoid trainers in his gym, and Giovanni didn't really Giovanni didn't really stand much better of a chance, since I only had to fight a few trainers in his gym, and again, he couldn't really do anything to my Blastoise because of the high special defense, so that wasn't really much of a problem. But after smooth sailing for so long in this Nuzlocke, we actually have a really terrible rival fight. We lose Shinjiro and another one of our Pokemon. We lose Shinjiro, and that's really bad for our Elite Four team, especially since with Snorlax gone, I didn't really have a good tank to really use anymore. I was kind of mildly panicking. I guess after so long of saying, oh, the rivals team was really easy, guys, I finally actually got what was coming to me, I guess. This was his revenge. Lorelei's team wasn't the hardest, but it was definitely a fight that I have a lot to say about. Basically, the fight starts, a lot of issues within this fight really stems from the fact that I was really stupid and did not my Jolteon that I have from Celadon Thunderbolt, because I was just not smart. So I went in with Thunder, tempted by the higher damage output, and the built-in mischance kept failing me and missing, which was just very difficult to deal with. And then after Jolteon got too close to death, I had to switch out to another Pokemon to handle it. And it was just a lot of war of attrition against Pokemon like Slowbro, the Jinx, who kept healing from the full restores, which you don't really notice how hard full restores, you don't really realize how handy items in battles are until you yourself can't use them, but your opponent can. And finally, Lapras, which with Lapras, I kind of ended up 1v1ing Lorelei's Lapras with my own, because she eventually swapped Jinx out for Lapras. So what I decided to do was I swapped into my own Lapras and used Perish Song on hers, which forced her to switch back to her Jinx, and when she did, I used Bite on the Jinx coming in and knocked it out finally. But then afterwards, we kind of just went back to a war of attrition with Lorelei's Lapras, and I had to rely on Makoto chipping away at Lapras, since Makoto kind of stepped in to be the sort of tank that Shinjiro's death left in the party, with Protect and the leftovers. After a long time, and I mean a long time, we actually finally managed to knock out her last Pokemon, thank God. Going into Bruno, it started out pretty easy. After all, we started by one-shotting the Onix and then just using a combination of Rain Dance and Surf with the other Pokemon, really 1v1ing them until we came to Machamp. And I tried using that strategy with Machamp, but Machamp was just hurting too much, and with a combination of the potions, I ended up having to switch, and I made a very foolish choice. I decided to send out Fuka the Alakazam, and she died immediately to a crit, which really hurt, especially since that was going to be, let's just say, the next fight would have been a lot easier if we still had our Alakazam. But afterwards, I swapped into my Jolteon, which is what I probably should have done from the start, and I Thunder Waved and just chipped away at this beast until he was dead, and then afterwards I sent in my Lapras to easily destroy the last Onix, which that was a very unnecessary loss that could have been mitigated, and you're about to see why that was a bad loss. Agatha's team would have been very easy if not for the fact that I had lost my Psychic-type Pokemon prior, and I didn't really have a real replacement. I also failed to really play around the Toxic, which I probably should have known was there. So it was just a really long battle that I miraculously was able to work around somehow, but constantly getting battered by Toxics and a bunch of bullshit and slowly chipping away at her Pokemon. It was ironically just like the Gengar the other poison types that didn't immediately get destroyed by Bite that were the main problem, and if this had gone worse, then I would have just been unable to finish. This is where my friend's Nuzlocke, who I was on the phone with this entire time, run died, so going forward, I knew that I had to finish the race for her, I guess, so there was some fulfillment. But it's easy to say going into Lance, I was a little bit nervous, but I was more determined than ever. So with 4 Pokemon left, I kind of go on. So going into Lance, I decided to make some necessary preparations by giving held items and teaching Jolteon an electric move that will actually hit, that is not Thunder, which was my mistake. But going in, I start out the fight with Jolteon versus his Gyarados, and I immediately hit Shockwave, which is not as good as Thunderbolt, but I forgot to get Thunderbolt, so that's my fault. But either way, it one-shotted Gyarados just fine, and so I swapped into Lapras after he sends out Dragonair, so I can start hopefully sweeping with Lapras. Lapras one-shots both his Dragonair and his Aerodactyl, despite taking a pretty heavy hit from Ancient Power, which took out about a little over a half of Lapras's health, which was very unideal, but I was able to continue sweeping his Dragon types when Dragonair came out with Ice Beam, which was thankfully a one-shot because I really don't need any more damage being laid. Last but not least, he sent out the Dragonite, which I was a little bit nervous about, especially after they started using Outrage, but luckily I was able to very easily take out the Dragonite. This was by far the easiest fight in the entire Elite Four so far, especially since all I had to do was really play around what I couldn't one-shot with Ice Beam. We finally go the face against our rival, the final fight, and to say that I was a little bit nervous is an understatement. This was the first real time that I actually got to the final part of a Nuzlocke, which, was crazy. So going into Blue, I made some necessary preparations like teaching Earthquake to Makoto and just reorganizing the moveset, especially since I don't have a whole lot of Pokemon left to work with. I have 2 dead slots, there's only 4 Pokemon left, and I'm just very nervous. My nerves were very, very running rampant at this point. But either way, we pressed forward. Going into Blue, I actually had an unforeseen advantage to using Shockwave. His Pidgeot, as most people will know, will spam Sand Attack, and Jolteon using Shockwave left Pidgeot with marginal health, which would result in a full restore being used. Using this, I was able to waste a lot of Blue's full restores up until he just couldn't heal anymore and I got hit. And especially since Shockwave always hits no matter what your accuracy is, Sand Attack wasn't really affecting it. So after easily dispatching of that, I swap out into Makoto when he sends out Rhydon, and I start using Surf, despite taking a pretty heavy hit from an Earthquake from the Rhydon. But thankfully, Makoto one-shots easily with Surf once he gets a chance, which was very, very reassuring. 2 Pokemon down, I go into Venusaur, and I know that I have the switch very fast, but I forgot that this Venusaur only has Solar Beam as an attacking move, and I get nervous, which results in me swapping out, unfortunately, and that was a mistake, especially since I could have just played around the Solar Beam with Protect, but, you live and you learn. So I switched to Koromaru, who finally gets to be used, and I try to play around the incoming Solar Beam by using Roar, but I was actually slower than the Venusaur, which I could have probably checked with more calculations. But it wasn't that it was a big problem, because that only did around a third of Koromaru's health. So, dragging out his Arcanine, I switch back to Makoto to tank probably an incoming fire move. I would think anyways. But Makoto gets hit with an extreme speed, which doesn't really do a whole lot of damage to him, only bringing down his health a little bit into the yellow, but since I have the leftovers, that's still not really a problem. Now, I finally use Protect to just sort of get a little bit of extra health back, just because I was getting a little bit nervous at this point, especially since I've never done this well. And I also stupidly use Rest when an Earthquake would have easily done the job, but I think at this point I just wanted to make sure I had high health going forward with this fight, especially since I just wanted to be safe, which that was admittedly a really stupid decision, since Arcanine continued using extreme speed, which just continuously chipped down my health, and I realized, well, Blastoise was asleep. Wow, this would have just been a lot better if I had used Earthquake and just maybe swapped to Lapras or something. But I continued, hoping that I wouldn't take too much damage before waking up. Finally, upon waking up, I use Protect one more time to get just a little bit of health back, and then I finally use a move that would actually knock out the Arcanine. Thankfully. 3 Pokemon down, 3 left to go. He sends out Venusaur once again. Still not really aware of the fact that Solar Beam was Venusaur's only attack, I send Koromaru back out right into the range of danger as my rival charges up another Solar Beam, and I use a Flamethrower, this time going first, proving that before it was a speed tie. Hoping that Flamethrower will kill, but Flamethrower unfortunately does not do full one-hit KO damage, leaving Venusaur with a sliver before he retaliates by using Solar Beam, knocking the dog all the way down into yellow health within 50. I know that he'll use a full restore, so I go for another Flamethrower. Luckily, he did use another full restore, and I was able to just continuously loop this to waste even more of their full restores, which was actually quite a few. I was actually wrong when I said that I use all their full restores, actually. So that was good. This loop finally ends with me getting a crit and knocking him out from full health. 4 down and 2 left to go. He sends out Gyarados. Now, I have a proven strategy for this since I figured that since I had a level lead, I could one-shot this Gyarados again from full health with Shockwave. So I switch out to Jolteon, bringing them back out, and I take a decent amount of damage from Thrash, but I think I brazenly go forward with Shockwave, not really thinking about not killing him and losing Jolteon, but I do thankfully one-hit KO the Gyarados, completely knocking them down. Finally, last but not least, he sends out his Alakazam. I immediately use Shockwave on him to instantly make this a lot easier on myself. However, Jolteon also gets paralyzed from Synchronize, making them effectively useless. So I pivot to Mitsuru. I switch to Mitsuru just so I can have a tankier option, especially since I don't want to lose any more Pokemon. And I smugly use Perish Song. At this point in the call, I was like extremely ecstatic because I had basically won. All I had to do was survive for 3 turns, which was extremely easy to do. I basically won. I was basically taking my victory lap. It was a really good feeling. I knew that this was checkmate. So yeah, that was a really, really good feeling, and I was just extremely, extremely ecstatic. It's always a good feeling when you know that you've won against your opponent 100%. And as I saw that health bar drop from yellow to red and then to nothing, I just had the biggest smile on my face because this was the first Nuzlocke I had ever completed. But yeah, that was a really, really fun time, and I plan on doing more Nuzlockes in the future. Now, what can I say about this experience as a whole? Well, for one, I think I learned a lot better decision-making from this, and I probably won't make as many stupid decisions as I had previously, but, you know, I can't really guarantee that I'm not going to make any stupid decisions. But me and my friend want to do this again, and we're going to do it in Emerald next time. So if you enjoyed watching this, then I would encourage you to subscribe because we do plan on doing a little bit more Nuzlocke videos, and I hope that I do a better job at chronicling the important fights because if you watch to this point, you can tell I got a lot better at going beat for beat in fights near the end of this script, so let's hope that I do better then. Anyways.